We'll start with the news coming out of Victoria. 12 cases today. This is really the first time that the government there has had to respond to an outbreak since the second wave. How do you expect this will play out? Do you think we'll see more restrictions in Victoria?
Good afternoon to you, Gabriella. Yes, I find it hard to believe that we won't be in a situation where there will eventually be more restrictions. The difference between what happened with hotel quarantine and aged care back when the second wave started is that those cases largely emerged from overseas arrivals. On this occasion, they're coming from New South Wales, and people returning over the holiday period from New South Wales into Victoria are not necessarily all going to end up in Melbourne. And what the government was able to do last time in Victoria was lock down Melbourne and stop the virus getting out to the rest of the state and indeed to the rest of Australia. Failure by the Berejiklian government to take sufficient steps early enough mean that it's now escaped New South Wales and will get into parts of Victoria, not just metropolitan Melbourne, but other centres as well in all likelihood. And that is going to make it, I suspect, somewhat more difficult, or at least a different challenge to what was faced during the winter here in Victoria. I also think it's interesting to see that after repeated calls by significant health authorities, most recently the AMA, Gladys Berejiklian has finally mandated wearing of masks in important indoor areas, which is an indication of policy failure there too, in that the voluntary wearing of masks was not being sufficiently strongly applied or complied with, so that it now does have to be mandatory, because the one thing we do know about this virus is it doesn't respect discretion. It will look for a weak spot, or will find a weak spot and go right through it. So I'm very glad that it's finally happened, but it has been at a cost not just to Victoria and not just to New South Wales, but to the rest of Australia indeed, forcing fairly draconian measures and fairly hasty measures to try to minimise the impact of the outbreaks in New South Wales.
I suppose the difference is New South Wales has dealt with outbreaks many times before. It's been declared the gold standard when it comes to dealing with outbreaks and also contact tracing. The Premier today has made mask wearing mandatory, and she's also imposed further restrictions. There can now only be 30 people at a gym. Do you think that's not a fair response, seeing as she's done this before and it seems as though the numbers aren't escalating out of control?
It's a fair response, no doubt, but it's too late. It should have happened immediately, these sorts of steps. I noted that when she was talking in her media conference this morning, she pointed out that the Crossroads outbreak took 4 months to bring under control, and she says she hopes that the outbreaks that are currently in play in New South Wales will not take as long. It's certainly the case that New South Wales has a very good track and trace system, and that has had significant impact on minimising the outbreaks that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 weeks. But it hasn't stopped them, and it has not stopped the virus getting out of New South Wales into Victoria in particular, and causing not just Victoria but other states to introduce measures which they would not have wished, and which prevent what the Prime Minister was seeking a month or two ago, which was that we would have a COVID normal summer. We are not having a COVID normal summer, and the cause of that is New South Wales.
Well, many people who are not having a COVID normal summer, thousands of them were holidaying in New South Wales, and they had very little time to make it back into Victoria before they were told that they'll have to turn around. And now people or Victorians who are out of the state will have to apply, and are in New South Wales will have to apply for an exemption to get into hotel quarantine. Do you think it was fair for the Victorian government to give people such little notice to get back into the state?
It was very difficult indeed, and very trying for many, many thousands of people. The Christmas New Year period is one of the moments of the year where Australians move around a very great deal. But given what had not been done in New South Wales, I don't see really whether the Victorian government had much option. It's also worth noting that as early as December the 18th, the Victorian government was warning people from Victoria not to go to Sydney in particular, saying it was dangerous what was occurring there. Now, I can understand why people would have thought, having made holiday bookings and so on and so forth on the New South Wales South Coast and elsewhere, that they would have wanted to meet those commitments and enjoy the summer. But given what was not done in New South Wales quickly enough, strongly enough, I don't think the Victorian government had much option but to act with the haste in which it did. It made things very, very difficult, financially compromising indeed for some people as well to get back. But I'm not sure what else Victoria could have done. If it had not taken that step, the likelihood is that the virus would be in many, many more parts of Victoria than may now be the case. But we're in for a difficult period, both in Victoria and in New South Wales for some weeks, I would have thought, to come.
There's no doubt about that. Some Victorians who've had their holiday plans ruined are calling on Daniel Andrews to cut his holiday short and return back to work. Do you think he should?
Well, I also noticed that Gladys Berejiklian at a media conference today noted that she's going on leave at the same time as introducing tougher measures there. I'm not sure if she's going on leave why Daniel Andrews should return from his, but it does seem that he's been in close contact with Jacinta Allen, who's the acting Premier at the moment. All steps that have been taken in consultation with him. I'm not sure that him being here at this moment would have made any material difference, except that, as we know, through the period of the winter, and Gabriella, you were at plenty of those media conferences, we would have seen Daniel Andrews in his North Face jacket, although maybe it's a bit warm for that at the moment, but he would have been delivering the message rather than Jacinta Allen or the Health Minister.
There was certainly a lot of those press conferences. Just finally, before I let you go, Labor has dumped its controversial franking credits policy. It won't be taken to the next election. Do you think that was the right call?
I don't think it had much option, given how seriously and what a great difficulty it made for Bill Shorten and the Labor Party at the last election, but to do that. In terms of revenue, which is going to be a major problem for a federal government of any stripe in the years to come, particularly given the amount of money that's been spent in addressing the COVID-19 crisis, in particular JobKeeper, JobSeeker, and so on and so forth, and the support for business too. This means that both sides of politics have made it more difficult to raise the money that they will need to bring the budget back into balance, and that probably means either further cuts to services or higher taxes. There's not much in the way of options there. The other alternative, of course, is growth, and we've seen very little of that, and I don't think that will do it alone. But given the mismanagement of that by the opposition in the lead up to the 2019 election, I don't see really that Anthony Albanese had much option really but to get rid of it.
Jim Middleton, appreciate your insight and analysis this afternoon. Thank you.
My pleasure, Gabriella.